Hi, everybody. I'm Kathy Pooler. Welcome to Memoir Writer's Journey. I'm thrilled today to have author Mary C. Gottschalk with us in this interview about her debut novel, A Fitting Place. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm delighted to be here. I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I've watched your show before, and I think it's terrific.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to have you. Now, I just want to say a few words before we get started, and it's that we all know Mary from her wonderful memoir, Sailing Down the Moonbeam, in which she takes us on a sailing adventure. She leaves corporate America, takes us on a sailing adventure, and in the process, she shows us how, in getting out of our comfort zone, we can grow in new ways. Now, I won't give away the theme in her novel. I'll let her do that for us. But I will tell you that it has to do with leaving a comfort zone. So let's get started. Mary, it seems as though a lot of our memoir colleagues are turning to fiction after writing their memoir. What made you decide to write A Fitting Place after writing Sailing Down the Moonbeam?
Well, I think there were a couple of things, Kathleen. One of them was that, as you mentioned, the premise of getting out of your comfort zone. That is a big thing for me ever since the sailing trip. I learned so much, how much you grow when you have to question your own values, where you are in situations where the things that you have always taken for granted no longer work, where you have to find new approaches to getting through the problems of everyday life. But the thing about the memoir was that I actually made a choice to step out of my comfort zone, to give up a career, to give up my job, to leave my family and friends behind, and go off into a strange world. Not everybody gets to do that. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to explore the premise of getting outside your comfort zone, of stepping outside your comfort zone, but in an environment that would be more familiar to people, to mm-hmm. the average reader. And so I ended up with doing a story about a woman who is devastated when her husband leaves her. She falls into a rebound romance, which repeats some of the same problems as her marriage. But because she is in a rebound relationship with a woman, it totally changes the dynamics. She can no longer blame her problems on how men behave or, the role that she's forced into. And so she is pushed out of her comfort zone and begins to learn a great deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you certainly showed us a lot about comfort zones and being pushed out of them in both your memoir and your novel.
Well, thank you, Kathy.
Well, we're told as memoir writers that we need to use fiction techniques. So how was it writing your novel, writing a memoir first? Did that help you write your novel?
Oh, I could not have done it without the experience of the memoir first. And I think there's a couple of things. One of them is that, and you alluded to this, a good memoir reads like fiction. Mm-hmm. A good memoir has a story arc, it has suspense, it has plot points. If you just give a list of the things that happen to you, that's not a memoir. That's just a wordy litany or a wordy chronology. For a memoir to be good, it has to have a point. It has to have something that the author learned, that came away from the experience with, and something that is relevant to other people. Mm-hmm. And so it has to read like fiction. It has to engage the reader and get them kind of turning the pages. And so the opportunity to do that in the memoir gave me an idea of what it looked like when it was done properly. I don't think I could have done that from scratch. Mm-hmm. The other thing was that one of the challenges of the memoir, I have to laugh, but the first readers of the first draft of my memoir one of them looked at me and said, you know, I've known you for years, but you're not on the pages of this book. I don't see you on the pages of the book. And so I had to go back and develop tremendous skills that I'd never needed as a professional writer to make my characters three-dimensional, make them fully realized, to make them complex characters. And that was in a place where I actually knew the characters, I knew what I was searching for. I think I could not have done that in a novel if I had started with a blank slate and not known where I was trying to get to.
Yeah. So your personal experience really did help. Yeah.
Oh, tremendously.
Well, you know, you might have already answered this, but I'll ask it again, and that is, how did you decide on the plot and the character for your novel?
It was interesting. The story arc, where Lindsay was at the beginning and where Lindsay was at the end, almost didn't change from the day I sat down to write the first word. But what happened along the way was that I had an idea, a rough idea of the characters that I wanted and the plot points that I wanted. But what happened was that as I continued to write, as I continued to draw these characters, as I got farther and farther into the book, I would say there were a couple of things that happened. One of them was that my characters would sort of stand there and look at me and say, well, I know this is where you wanted us to go, but we're not going there. You know, you have drawn us in a way that set of choices doesn't feel comfortable. And so at that point, I would either have to redraw my characters or change the event. Another thing was that I started out with a whole bunch of characters that I thought were very clever. You know, this whole business of stepping outside your comfort zone and learning, I was throwing in all sorts of ways to make Lindsay uncomfortable. And what I realized as I got farther and farther into it was that these characters might have kind of momentary benefits of making her uncomfortable, but they didn't move the plot forward. They were just scenes, and so I jettisoned those characters. The other was that it kind of the opposite of that. One of the things that Lindsay's involved with is she goes into therapy, and I brought a therapist into it really in the third draft. I needed her to make the plot go forward. So I think those were kind of the major steps. I certainly did not sit down. I don't know whether it was you who did the plotter versus pantser blog of, do you sit down and lay out every step of it, or do you kind of punt as you go? And I would say that I'm halfway in between.
Yeah. Well, and also it's a process, and the story that needs to be told kind of develops a life of its own.
Absolutely.
Reveals itself if we just sit still long enough, right?
Well, yeah. I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. That as Lindsay and Joan got to know each other, having drawn their characters or personalities in a certain way, I had to let their personalities and characters do the work.
Right. Oh, interesting. Well, you know, that kind of leads into the next question, and that is about Lindsay. And we've all met Lindsay through your blog posts on your novel themes, which by the way, was a brilliant idea. And we know that she's conflicted and that she suffers from self-defeating behavior patterns. And so can you give us some insight in her character development?
Well, I think it goes back to, well, let me put it this way. The self-defeating behaviors come for Lindsay, as with many of us, because there is a disconnect between what we want and what we do. And very often we are doing, and this is Lindsay's situation, very often we are doing what other people expect us to do. And Lindsay, a lot of Lindsay's conflict comes because she subordinates her own desires and needs to her husband and to her employees and to her mother-in-law, and she lets other people control her life. But in giving up of herself, she becomes more and more rigid in the way that she responds. Mm. And so this was one of the reasons why and maybe I'm anticipating another question, but this is one of the reasons why I put her into a love affair with a woman, because all of a sudden she couldn't fall back on all of the stereotypes that she's used to manage her behavior. Mm-hmm. She couldn't say, well, gee, the husband is supposed to be the dominant member of the family. She couldn't say, oh, this is happening because men are insensitive. She's now in a relationship with a woman, and here she has subordinated her behavior and her needs to her lover once again. Yeah. Not because men are insensitive. Mm-hmm. It's because she's made choices that don't really work for her. And so her growth is beginning to take responsibility for her own actions.
Yeah. Well, actually, that does lead to my next question. And I've already mentioned one of the threads in your novel is the concept of sexual fluidity. And I wonder if you could discuss your decision to include such a controversial topic in your novel.
Well, it is definitely controversial, although I think it's a lot less controversial than it would have been had I written this thing 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Sexual fluidity in its most basic concept is that sexual attraction is as much a function of personality and character and circumstance as it is of hormones and gender. All right. And the reason that I brought it in was twofold. One of them was that I think it's important, as I just mentioned, for Lindsay to be in a place where she could not fall back on old stereotypes, where the traditional stereotypes of gender roles no longer became excuses for her. She had to find other ways of doing things. But the other reason that I used it is that I think that the experience that Lindsay had of falling into a love relationship with a woman after a failed marriage is something that has happened to many, many, many women who do not talk about it. Mm-hmm. If you remain single but aren't lesbian, you don't want the label. You don't want someone to come along and say, oh, she had an affair with a woman, she must be lesbian. Because if you're not lesbian, you don't want the label. Right? If you are back in a heterosexual relationship, very often your spouse or partner will not want you to talk about it. And I've been very fortunate because my partner thinks, well, this is really interesting, go for it. He doesn't find it difficult or threatening, but I think a lot of men do. And so it's really that kind of different purpose for writing the book is to open the door on something that people just have not talked about.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, and you do that so well.
Thank you.
Okay, so can you describe your writing process, like how long it took you to get from the idea to the published book?
I suppose the idea was brewing in my head even before I finished Sailing Down the Moonbeam, my memoir. But I would say the writing process was 4.5 years. Mm-hmm. From the time I put the first word to paper till the point I pushed the button on Create Space and got my first copy out. Mm-hmm. And the process, I guess this repeats a little bit what we were saying, something we were talking about a few minutes ago. But the very first process, part of the process for me is I am very analytical. I'm very logical. I'm very analytical. I've got to get it down, in a reasonable fashion. And then I will go back in the second draft and begin to create the plot points, begin to try and create some suspense, to begin to create some scenes. And when that process is well in hand, at that point I actually have to step back and look at the characters and say, are these three-dimensional people? Because that is one of the hardest things for me to do, because I am so logical. I don't read poetry. You know, people suggest that I should read poetry, and I always think, well, yeah, I should, but I don't, because I'm much too logical for most poetry, except for Mary Oliver. But the process of going back and creating fully realized three-dimensional characters is a real challenge for me.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of help from my editors. I've had a lot of help from my beta readers.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't have done it without them.
Yeah, well, I tell you, the characters in your story really put you through the mill, didn't they?
They did.
Oh, well, Mary, this has been great. Can you leave us with any writing tips for other writers?
I would say the most important writing tip, you know, I think you can write regularly, you can write when the mood strikes you, you can do it by pencil, you can do it by computer. A lot of that stuff I think is very personal. I would say from my reading over the last 2 years, 2.5 years, as I've been working on this book and kind of getting to know people on social media, is make the best use you possibly can of beta readers and editors. Mm-hmm. Because I think there are so many books that I have looked at in the last year where the story's really good. You know, there's really a compelling story there, but it's either badly written, it's not properly edited, it's got typos, mm-hmm. It's repetitive, the structure is funny. Mm-hmm. And so I think making use of professional resources and beta readers is absolutely critical.
Yes, excellent point. Okay, well, listen, I'm going to try to screen share your book, A Fitting Place, so hang in there with me.
Okay.
And let's see, do y'all see that?
I don't.
Start screen share. How's this?
Don't see it.
Hang on.
There it is. I see it.
There you go. And this is where you can, I don't know what that is. This is where you can order. And are there any other places to order the book, Mary?
It's also on Apple. It's an iBook.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mary, for a wonderful interview. All the information for Mary's book on how to order it and the book covers are in the post. And Mary, where can we find you?
I am on, my website is www.marycgottschalk.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, all those places.
Okay. Well, be sure and connect with Mary and be sure and get her books. And Mary has graciously offered to give away either an ebook or a print copy of both the memoir and the novel to 2 lucky commenters whose names will be drawn in a random drawing. So please feel free to comment or ask Mary any questions. We'd love to get some conversation going about this book. And thank you once again, Mary, for coming.
Thank you so much, and I thought your questions were terrific. I mean, they really got to the heart of what I want people to see in A Fitting Place. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.